My father stood in the middle of a huge hall, raised a glass of champagne, and smiled at nearly 200 guests. He looked happy, proud, as if, at this exact moment, he was about to show everyone what a wonderful father he was. The hall fell silent. My sister, Catherine, sat next to her husband at the head table, beaming with pleasure. My mother held a napkin to her eyes, mimicking touching emotions. And I was sitting just a few meters away from them, already understanding what was about to happen. "Today, I want to say something about my youngest daughter," my father said into the microphone. A few guests turned their heads in my direction. I felt a familiar sensation, the very feeling that had accompanied me my entire life. They were going to tell people a story about me again, but not my real story. Despite all the difficulties, my father continued with a smile. Her mother and I never gave up on her. We always supported her. We are still paying for her housing and helping her move forward. Quiet smiles appeared across the room. Someone next to me whispered, "What a caring family." I looked at my parents. My mother smiled proudly. My sister, Catherine, gave a barely noticeable smirk. They thought they had put me in my place. They thought all the guests would see a spoiled younger daughter who was still dependent on her parents. They thought I would smile gratefully and nod. But no one in that hall knew one small detail. I hadn't needed their money for almost 2 years. I paid for my apartment myself. I built my career myself. I achieved everything I had on my own. And most importantly, my father didn't know that the company I worked for had recently offered me a position he couldn't even dream of for me. He thought he was still holding my hand, but he didn't realize that I had let go of his hand a long time ago. So when he handed me the microphone and said, "Come on, tell everyone how grateful you are to your family," he wasn't giving me a chance to say thank you. He accidentally gave me a chance to tell the truth. And the next few minutes changed the way my entire family treated me. But before we continue this story, if you enjoy real-life stories like this, please subscribe to the channel. It helps us create more of these tales. And I'm always curious to know where you are watching us from. Write your country in the comments. And now, back to the story. My name was Olivia Bennett. I was 27 years old, and if you asked my parents who I was, they would answer very differently than I would. To them, I was that daughter who always needs help. That was the image they had created many years ago, and they were so used to it that they didn't even notice when reality had long since changed. My older sister, Catherine, had been the family favorite since childhood. And I don't say this out of jealousy. Catherine really was beautiful, outgoing, and knew how to connect with people. She would walk into a room, and everyone would notice her immediately. In school, she participated in every event. She was the cheerleading captain. She won awards. She knew how to make people admire her. And my parents adored it. When Catherine got average grades in school, my father said, "The main thing is that she is trying." When I got some of the best results in the class, my mother said, "That's good. But don't get too arrogant." When Catherine wanted an expensive prom, my parents spent thousands of dollars. When I asked for help paying for prep courses before college, my father said, "You're a big girl. Learn to rely on yourself." That was the first time I realized one thing. In our family, love was never equal. It depended on how convenient a person was to have around. Catherine was a bright star, and I was the person who was supposed to support that star. I quickly learned not to expect too much. I got a scholarship, worked evenings, studied at night. When my friends went on vacation in the summer, I worked at a small cafe near the university. When Catherine posted pictures from expensive restaurants paid for by my father, I counted my money to see if I had enough for textbooks. But I didn't complain, because I knew, if I wanted to achieve something, I would have to do it myself. After graduation, the situation changed. Only my family didn't notice. I got a degree in business analytics and almost immediately started working at a small tech company. At first, the salary was ordinary. But I grew quickly. I took on extra projects, worked harder than others, learned new skills. A year later, I was promoted. A few months after that, I was offered to manage a small department. I was happy. It was the first moment in my life when I felt I actually did it. I wanted to tell my parents, but every time, the conversation ended the same way. "By the way, Catherine is choosing a dress. By the way, Catherine needs help with the photographer. By the way, Catherine is thinking about buying a new car. The whole family revolved around one person, my sister, and gradually, I stopped trying to share my victories. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I was tired of speaking into a void. When Catherine announced her engagement to Michael, my parents were thrilled. They threw a dinner, booked an expensive restaurant, invited relatives. My father raised a glass and said, "Finally, our daughter got the man she deserves." Everyone applauded. I smiled. I really was happy for my sister, but within a week, the whole family turned into a wedding committee. Every conversation was only about the wedding. Flowers, music, guests, menu, dresses, decorations, and gradually, I began to notice something. I wasn't invited as a sister. I was being used as free help. "Olivia, can you pick up the invitations? Olivia, can you check the guest list? Olivia, can you come over on Saturday and help with the decorations?" At first, I agreed, because she was my sister, but then my work responsibilities became more serious. One day, I had to decline a meeting with the wedding planners. I said calmly, "Catherine, I have an important presentation at work. I won't be able to make it." Silence fell on the other end of the line, and then I heard her sigh. Of course, she said that word as if I had committed a betrayal. "You always choose yourself." I closed my eyes. "Catherine, I'm just working." "No, Olivia. You never understand. This is an important period of my life." That was when I first realized, to my family, my life would always be less important. A few days later, my father called me, and that conversation became the beginning of everything. He didn't ask how I was doing. Didn't ask about work. Didn't ask why I was busy. He went straight to the accusations. "We need to talk." I was sitting in my car outside the office. "Okay, about what?" "About your attitude." I actually smiled, because I already knew what was coming next. "Catherine is upset. Your mother is upset. We all notice that you've become too independent." I looked out the window. Too independent. Interesting. To them it sounded like a problem. "Dad, I just can't spend every day working on the wedding." "Exactly," he said sharply. "You forgot who was always there for you." I was silent. He continued, "We've done a lot for you." That phrase was familiar to me. It appeared every time they wanted to get something in return. "We paid for your expenses, Dad." "No, let me finish." His voice grew colder. "If you can't support your sister at the most important moment of her life, then maybe we should reconsider our help to you." And there it was. The same old threat. Money. Control. A sense of obligation. He thought I would be scared. That I would start making excuses. That I would become that little girl again who was afraid of losing their approval. But he was wrong, because he didn't know the most important thing. I had stopped depending on him a long time ago. I answered calmly, "Okay." A pause followed on the other end of the line. "What?" I said, "Okay. Do you understand what that means?" I smiled. "Yes, Dad. I understand." He was clearly expecting a different answer. "Then don't count on our support anymore." "I won't." And for the first time in my life, I heard confusion in his voice, because his weapon didn't work anymore. After that conversation with my father, I sat in the car for a few more minutes without starting the engine. Not because I was in pain, and not because I regretted the words I had spoken. It was just strange to realize that the moment I had feared my whole life turned out to be so ordinary. I always thought that if my parents ever turned their backs on me, my world would crumble. I thought that without their support, I would feel lost. But instead, I felt something else. Relief. As if I had finally stopped carrying a heavy backpack I'd been wearing since childhood. That evening, for the first time in a long time, I cooked dinner and just sat in my apartment in silence. No one texted me about wedding matters. No one demanded that I come over. No one told me I had disappointed someone. And that was when I realized one important thing. I hadn't lost my family. I had just stopped letting them control my life. The next day, I arrived at work earlier than usual. My office was on the 23rd floor of a modern building downtown. Once, I used to walk in there feeling like I needed to prove to everyone around me that I was worth something. But now, I looked at this place differently. I was no longer the girl trying to earn validation. I was a specialist who had been chosen out of hundreds of other candidates. In the morning, my manager, James, invited me into his office. Olivia closed the door. I was a bit surprised. Usually, such conversations meant either a problem or major news. I sat across from him. He opened a folder with documents. "You know we've been watching your work for a long time, right?" I nodded. "This past year has been very strong. You helped the company increase profits in several areas." I smiled. "Thank you." He looked at me seriously. "We want to offer you a new position." I froze. "Which one?" He turned the folder toward me. It read, "Head of Strategic Development." I just stared at those words for a few seconds. "Are you serious?" James smiled. "More than serious." He explained that with the new position came a significant salary increase, additional bonuses, and the opportunity to lead my own team. I walked out of his office feeling as if the whole world had finally told me, "We see you." And right at that moment, I realized something funny. My parents were going to cut off my college money, and at the exact same time, my life was already moving to a completely different level. They were trying to close a door that I didn't even need anymore. A few days later, Catherine texted me again. Her message was short. "I hope you've thought about your behavior." I looked at the screen and didn't reply right away. Previously, such words would have made me make excuses. I would have written, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you." But now I was a different person. I replied calmly, "I think you can support your family without forgetting about your own life." The reply came almost instantly. "You always pretend to be the victim." I closed my eyes. That was what was amazing. I had never called myself a victim. They were the ones telling that story. The story where I was weak, where I constantly needed help, where my sister was successful, and I was a problem. But the truth was completely different. "Catherine," I said to myself, looking at the phone, "you just never looked closely enough." A week before the wedding, my parents unexpectedly changed their attitude toward me. It was so obvious it was almost funny. My father called, and, for the first time in a long time, spoke softly. "Olivia, you're coming to the wedding, right?" I was sitting at my desk. "Of course. It's my sister's wedding." He let out what sounded like a sigh of relief. "Good. It's important to us that the family is together." I felt something strange in his words, because just recently he had said that without their help, I would get nothing more, and now he wanted me to sit next to them in front of all the guests. But I didn't argue. "I'll be there." He paused for a moment. "And another thing, your mother wanted to ask you to help with something." Of course, help. That was the word I had heard my whole life. With what exactly? "She wants you to give a speech at the wedding." I was surprised. "A speech?" "Yes. A small one. About Catherine. About how wonderful she is." I almost laughed. Of course, they wanted me to stand before everyone and talk about how wonderful my sister was, after they had ignored my achievements for months. But I agreed. "Okay." My father was pleased. "See? I knew you'd understand." I didn't say anything back, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to prove anything to them in advance. I just waited. On the day of the wedding, everything looked perfect. The venue was incredible. A large country club outside the city. White flowers. Huge chandeliers. Beautiful tables. Catherine looked like someone who had been waiting for this moment her entire life. My mother walked around the hall telling the guests, "We invested so much into this day." My father shook hands with relatives. "Nothing is too good for my daughter." I stood nearby and watched, and suddenly I realized they weren't just celebrating a wedding, they were creating a picture of a perfect family, with perfect parents, with the perfect daughter. And somewhere inside that picture was me, but only in the role of the person who was supposed to validate their version. The ceremony went beautifully. Catherine and Michael exchanged vows. The guests cheered. Everyone smiled. After dinner, the speeches began. The best man spoke first. then a few relatives. Everyone said kind words. I was genuinely smiling. Despite everything, I loved my sister. But then my mother stood up, and I immediately felt the atmosphere shift. She took the microphone. Today is a special day. The guests fell silent. A day when we see the result of many years of love, support, and upbringing. She looked at Catherine. We always tried to give our children the best. I already knew where this conversation was heading. We sacrificed a lot. She spoke of sleepless nights, of money, of helping the children, of how parents must support their kids. It all sounded beautiful, until she added, sometimes children forget how much their parents have done for them. A few guests looked in my direction. I felt it. That exact wave. They were starting to tell a story. My story. Only without my participation. My mother smiled and handed the microphone to my father. He stood up slowly, confidently, like a man who knows exactly that he is about to get the reaction he wants. I want to add a few words. He looked at the guests. We are proud of both of our daughters. But then he paused. Too long. Too theatrical. Though each of them took her own path. I saw Catherine smile slightly. She knew what was coming next. Catherine started her own family today. She achieved stability. She built a future. Applause. Then my father turned to me, and Olivia is still on her way. The hall went quiet. I sat calmly. Because I knew he was about to make a mistake right now. But as a father, I am happy that I can continue to help her. He raised his glass. We still support her. We pay her expenses. We help her at the beginning of her adult life. The guests were smiling. Someone nodded. My sister looked pleased. My mother looked at me with a winning expression. And then my father said, Olivia, come up here. Tell everyone how grateful you are to your family. And he handed me the microphone. That exact moment changed everything. Because for the first time in many years, they gave me the opportunity to speak themselves. I stood up slowly. The whole room was looking at me. I took the microphone. My father was smiling. He thought he was about to hear gratitude. But he didn't know one thing. I was no longer that girl who was afraid to disappoint him. I was a woman who knew the truth. And now, everyone was going to hear that truth. I stood in the middle of the hall with the microphone in my hand. In front of me were nearly 200 people. Relatives, family, friends, my parents' colleagues, people who had just heard a beautiful story about what wonderful parents they were. A story where they were the heroes, and I was the person they were still helping out. I looked at my father first. He was smiling. Confidently. Calmly. He truly believed that in a few seconds, I would say exactly what he wanted to hear. That I would thank him for his support. That I would confirm to all the guests, yes, I am still that same daughter who needs help. But he was wrong. I took a deep breath and smiled. First of all, I want to congratulate Catherine and Michael. The guests relaxed immediately. A few people smiled. My sister looked at me expectantly. I truly wish you a happy life together. I hope you have a lot of love, respect, and moments that you will look back on many years from now. There was soft applause. I turned to my parents. And I also want to say thank you to my family. My father's smile grew wider. He already tasted victory, but a second later, it vanished. Thank you for everything you have done for me. I paused, though tonight, I was a bit surprised by some of the words. The hall grew quieter. My mother stopped smiling. Especially the talk about my financial support. Someone chuckled softly, thinking it was a joke. But my parents understood. I continued. Because honestly, I didn't expect to hear that my family is still paying for my education and helping me get by. I looked at my father. Simply because I graduated from college almost 2 years ago. An absolute silence fell over the hall. I saw my mother's face change. Her smile vanished. My father blinked slowly. Catherine stopped smiling. She looked at me as if she were seeing the real me for the very first time. I got my degree thanks to my scholarship, working, and a huge number of nights spent over textbooks instead of resting. I spoke calmly. Without anger, without the desire to humiliate anyone. I didn't need to shout. The truth spoke for itself. My parents did help me at certain points in my life, and I am grateful for that. I paused, but for the past few years, I have been paying my own expenses. The guests began to look at one another. I found a job myself, built a career myself, learned to handle my own problems myself. I looked at the people in the room, and the most interesting part is that my family didn't even know about it. An awkward silence set in. I smiled a little sadly, not because I hid it, but because no one ever asked. That phrase hit the hardest. Because it was the truth. My parents knew everything about Catherine's wedding. About the dress. About the flowers. About the menu. About the guests. But they didn't know where I worked. Didn't know about my promotion. Didn't know about my achievements. I continued. After graduating from college, I got a position at a tech company. My father tensed up. He clearly hadn't expected this, and a few weeks ago, I was offered a new position. I looked at my sister. I became the head of strategic development. Surprised looks appeared throughout the room. Someone quietly murmured, "Really?" I heard it, but I kept going, and I am very grateful for this opportunity. I smiled a little, because it proved one thing to me. I looked at my parents. Sometimes people think they hold the key to your future, silence, but they fail to notice that you have already built the door yourself. No one in the hall moved. My mother looked down, my father looked bewildered, and right then, something happened that my family didn't expect. A woman at a neighboring table raised her hand. It was an old friend of my mother's. "Excuse me, can I ask a question?" I nodded. "Of course." She smiled a bit awkwardly. "If you graduated from college 2 years ago, were your parents at your graduation?" That question hung in the air. I looked at my parents. My mother opened her mouth, but said nothing. My father was silent too, and I didn't even need to answer. Everyone already understood, but I said it anyway. "No." A pause. They couldn't make it. The hall became even quieter. They were busy that day. I looked at Catherine. They were choosing the venue for the wedding photo shoot. No one laughed. No one said a thing. Because now, people weren't just seeing an isolated moment. They were seeing the whole picture. My father abruptly stood up. "Olivia, this is not the place for such conversations." His voice was quiet but irritated. I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. "Dad, you gave me the microphone yourself." Several guests lowered their eyes. He fell silent. Because it was the truth. He wanted to show everyone his version of the story. But he forgot that I had a voice too. I turned to the guests. "I'm not saying this to ruin the celebration." I looked at Catherine. This is her day, and I sincerely want her to be happy. My sister looked much less confident now, but I think sometimes it's important to let people know the real story. I placed the microphone on the table. "Thank you for listening to me." And I walked back to my seat. The rest of the evening was strange. There were no more loud speeches, no more talk about how perfect our family was. People started looking at us differently. Some guests approached me. One woman said, "I had no idea what you went through." I smiled. "It's all good." And for the first time, it was true. I really was good, because I no longer needed to prove my worth. A week after the wedding, my parents called. I looked at the screen for a long time. Previously, a single message from them could ruin my whole day. Now, I just answered calmly. "Hello?" There was silence for a few seconds. Then my father said, "You put us in an embarrassing position." I expected those words, not an apology, not regret, an accusation. I told the truth. "You could have done it differently," I smiled. "And you could have not told people untruths about me." Silence again. My mother took the phone. "Olivia, we just wanted to help you." I closed my eyes. That phrase, always the same one. Help shouldn't be used as a way to control a person. This time, no one answered. After that, our relationship changed. Not instantly, not magically, My parents didn't wake up one morning as different people, but for the first time, they understood. They no longer had power over me. They could no longer use money as a threat, could not make me feel small, could not tell my story instead of me. Because now, I was telling it myself. A few months later, my career continued to thrive. I moved into a new apartment, bought the car I wanted, started traveling. But that wasn't the most important part. The most important part was that I finally stopped waiting for the moment when someone would say, "We're proud of you," because I had learned to say it to myself. Sometimes the people who believe in you the least think they know you the best. They see your past and decide they know your future. My parents always saw me as a girl who needed their help. They didn't notice the woman I had become. They thought they could take away their support and ruin my life. But they didn't realize one thing. They weren't building my future. They were just standing nearby while I built it myself. And that day at my sister's wedding, my father wanted to show everyone how much he was helping me. But instead, he accidentally showed everyone something else. Just how much he underestimated me. If you liked this story, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been underestimated by people who were close to you? Has it ever happened that someone tried to control your life, and you proved that you could handle it on your own? I'm very interested in reading your stories. Thank you for being with me. See you in the next story.